Service Teardown HP Z2 SFF G4 Workstation PC. How to replace the access panel. Removal. Pull out and hold the access panel release latch. Rotate the access panel up and lift it away from the chassis. Replacement. Slide the lip on the front edge of the access panel under the front chassis guide rail. Rotate the access panel against the chassis and press down, using minimal force, until it locks into place. How to replace the front bezel. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Removal. If installed, remove the Torx T15 screw that secures the front bezel to the chassis. Note, you can store the Torx T15 screw in the hole labeled bezel on the chassis. Pull out on the 3 tabs at the top of the bezel. Rotate the bezel away from the chassis and remove it. Replacement. Align the 3 hooks located at the bottom of the bezel with the 3 slots on the chassis. Rotate the bezel against the chassis and press it until it snaps into place. If needed, replace the Torx T15 screw. How to replace the dust filter. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Removal. Grasping the sides of the front bezel, separate the front part of the front bezel, which is magnetically secured to the back part of the front bezel. Pull up on the tab to release the dust filter. Remove the dust filter. Replacement. Align the slots on either side of the dust filter with the tabs on the front part of the front bezel. Slide the dust filter into position and press it down to secure it to the front part of the front bezel. Align the magnets on the front part of the front bezel to reattach it to the unit. How to replace the optical drive. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Removal. Detach the power and data cables from the optical drive. Press the green drive release latch at the rear of the optical drive and slide the optical drive out through the front of the unit. If you're installing a new optical drive, pull the green drive release latch off of the optical drive. Insert a straightened paper clip or other similar tool into the force eject hole on the optical drive to eject the drive tray. Pry and push out on the tabs securing the bezel to the optical drive, and remove the bezel from the drive. Replacement. If you are installing a new optical drive, the optical drive bezel has several tabs that fit into slots on the front of the optical drive. Press the bezel from the old optical drive onto the new optical drive until the tabs are secured. There are 2 small pins on the green drive release latch that fit into 2 small holes on the side of the optical drive. Press the latch pins into their holes to secure the latch to the new optical drive. Slide the optical drive into its drive bay through the front of the unit until the green release latch snaps into place. Replace the power and data cables to the rear of the optical drive. How to replace the hard drive assembly. Before you begin, remove the access panel and the front bezel. Removal. Rotate the drive's cage in an upward position. Disconnect the power cable and the SATA data cable from the hard drive. Squeeze the hard drive carrier handles and lift the hard drive assembly out of the chassis. Flex the hard drive carrier on one side until the alignment pins clear the drive screw holes, and then separate the hard drive and hard drive carrier. Replacement. Align the alignment pins on the hard drive carrier handles with the screw holes on the one side of the hard drive and insert the pins into the hard drive. Flex the hard drive carrier handle and insert the alignment pins into the screw holes on the other side of the hard drive. Slide the hard drive assembly into the bay on the chassis until it locks into place. Connect the power cable and the SATA data cable to the hard drive. Rotate the drive's cage to the downward position. How to replace the system memory. Before you begin, remove the access panel and the front bezel. Removal. Rotate the drive's cage in an upward position. Simultaneously push down on the latches on either side of the memory slot to release the memory module. Remove the memory module from the memory slot. Replacement. Ensure the latches on either side of the memory slot are open. Align the notch in the memory module with the key in the memory slot. Firmly press the memory module into the memory slot until the latches on either side snap into place and the memory module is fully seated. Rotate the drive's cage to the downward position. How to replace the RTC battery. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Removal. Using a flat-bladed tool, gently push back the latch to release the real-time clock battery. Insert a flat-bladed tool under the real-time clock battery and remove it from its socket on the motherboard. Replacement. Place the real-time clock battery in its socket on the motherboard. Using a flat-bladed tool, press down to secure the real-time clock battery into its socket on the motherboard. How to replace the SD card reader. Before you begin, remove the access panel and the front bezel. Removal. Rotate the drive's cage in an upward position. Disconnect the SD card reader cable from the motherboard. Remove the SD card reader cable from the routing channel on the chassis. Press the locking tab to release the SD card reader and pull the SD card reader out of the front opening in the chassis. Carefully guide the SD card reader cable out of the opening in the chassis. Remove the SD card reader. Replacement. Carefully guide the SD card reader cable into the opening on the chassis. Push the SD card reader into the opening on the chassis until it is fully seated. Route the SD card reader cable into the routing channel on the chassis. Connect the SD card reader cable into its connector on the motherboard. Rotate the drive's cage to the downward position. How to replace the USB-C board. Before you begin, remove the access panel and the front bezel. Note, the USB-C 3.1 Gen 2 charging port is a configurable option for the HP Z2 SFF G4 workstation PC and will not be available on all models. Removal. Rotate the drive's cage in an upward position. Disconnect the USB-C board cable from its connector on the motherboard. Remove the USB-C board cable from the routing channel on the chassis. Press the locking tab to release the USB-C board from the chassis. Carefully remove the USB-C board from the opening in the chassis. Carefully guide the USB-C board cable out of the opening in the chassis. Replacement. Carefully guide the USB-C board cable into the opening in the chassis. Push the USB-C board into the opening in the chassis until it is fully seated. Route the USB-C board cable into the routing channel on the chassis. Connect the USB-C board cable into its connector on the motherboard. Rotate the drives cage to the downward position. How to replace the front I/O assembly. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, the M.2 solid-state drive if installed, the SD card reader board, and the USB-C board. Removal. Rotate the drives cage in an upward position. Disconnect the front audio cable from the motherboard. Disconnect the power button cable from the motherboard. Disconnect the front USB cable from the motherboard. Remove the front audio cable and the power button cable from the routing channel on the chassis. Remove the Torx T15 screw that secures the front I/O assembly to the front of the chassis. Pull the front I/O assembly out of the chassis, guiding the USB cable, the audio cable, and the power button cable out of the opening on the chassis. Replacement. Guide the USB cable, power button cable, the audio cable into the opening on the chassis. Slide the front I/O assembly onto the opening on the chassis so it aligns with the screws on the chassis and push down until it is fully seated. Replace the Torx T15 screw to secure the front I/O assembly to the front of the chassis. Route the audio cable and the power button cable through the routing channel on the chassis. Connect the front USB cable to the motherboard. Connect the power button cable to the motherboard. Connect the front audio cable to the motherboard. Rotate the drives cage to the downward position. How to replace the wireless LAN module. Before you begin, remove the access panel and the front bezel. Removal. Rotate the drives cage in an upward position. Caution: use care when disconnecting the wireless LAN antenna cables from the wireless LAN module. A damaged cable or connector can degrade workstation performance. Carefully disconnect the wireless LAN antenna cables from the wireless LAN module by grasping the connectors with a small pair of needle nose pliers or tweezers. Remove the P1 Phillips head screw that secures the wireless LAN module to the motherboard and allow it to raise to the spring tension position. Note: some wireless LAN modules may be fitted with a captive Torx T8 screw. Grasp the wireless LAN module by the edges and pull gently to remove it. Replacement. Align the notch on the wireless LAN module with the key in the wireless LAN module slot on the motherboard. Keep the wireless LAN module at a 30-degree angle and insert it into its slot on the motherboard. Replace the P1 Phillips head screw to secure the wireless LAN module to the motherboard. Note: the wireless LAN antenna connectors are labeled 1 and 2 and should be connected to the corresponding 1 and 2 labeled ports on the wireless LAN module. The front antenna is antenna 1 and the rear antenna is antenna 2. Reconnect the wireless LAN antenna cables to the wireless LAN module. Rotate the drives cage to the downward position. How to replace the wireless LAN antennas. Before you begin, remove the access panel and the front bezel. Removal. Rotate the drives cage in an upward position. Caution: use care when disconnecting the wireless LAN antenna cables from the wireless LAN module. A damaged cable or connector can degrade workstation performance. Disconnect the wireless LAN antenna cables from the wireless LAN module. Remove the Torx T15 screw, which secures the front wireless LAN antenna to the chassis. Remove the front wireless LAN antenna cable from the routing channel on the chassis. Using a flat-bladed tool, carefully remove the wireless LAN antenna from the adhesive that secures it to the front of the chassis. Carefully guide the wireless LAN antenna cable through the hole on the chassis and remove the front wireless LAN antenna. Remove the rear wireless LAN antenna cable from the routing channel on the chassis. Push down on the plastic tab, located on the rear of the workstation, to release the black plastic cover from the chassis, and rotate it down to remove the two clips from the chassis. Remove the Torx T15 screw that secures the rear wireless LAN antenna to the chassis. Pull the wireless LAN antenna off of the alignment pin and guide the wireless LAN antenna cable through the hole in the chassis. Remove the rear wireless LAN antenna. Replacement. Push the rear wireless LAN antenna cable through the hole on the rear of the chassis and place the wireless LAN antenna on the alignment pin. Replace the Torx T15 screw that secures the rear wireless LAN antenna to the chassis. Route the rear wireless LAN antenna cable through the routing channel on the chassis. Replace the black plastic cover by inserting the two plastic tabs into the two holes on the rear of the chassis. Rotate the black plastic cover and insert the plastic tab located at the top into the chassis. Guide the front wireless LAN antenna cable through the hole in the front of the chassis. Place the front wireless LAN antenna on the alignment pin and press down to adhere the front wireless LAN antenna to the chassis. Replace the Torx T15 screw that secures the wireless LAN antenna to the chassis. Route the front wireless LAN antenna cable through the routing channel on the chassis. Note: the wireless LAN antenna connectors are labeled 1 and 2 and should be connected to the corresponding 1 and 2 labeled ports on the wireless LAN module. The front antenna is antenna 1 and the rear antenna is antenna 2. Reconnect the wireless LAN antenna cables to the wireless LAN module. Rotate the drives cage to the downward position. How to replace the speakers. Before you begin, remove the access panel and the front bezel. Removal. Rotate the drives cage in an upward position. Disconnect the speaker cable from the motherboard. Remove the speaker cable from the routing channel on the chassis. Remove the two Torx T15 screws that secure the speaker to the front of the chassis. Remove the speaker from the chassis. Replacement. Position the speaker against the chassis and align the screw holes. Replace the two Torx T15 screws that secure the speaker to the chassis. Route the speaker cable into the routing channel on the chassis. Connect the speaker cable to the motherboard. Rotate the drives cage to the downward position. How to replace the power supply. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, and the M.2 solid-state drive if installed. Removal. Rotate the drive's cage in an upward position. Rotate the fan diverter rear in an upward position. Press the release tab and disconnect the CPU power cable from the motherboard. Rotate the fan diverter rear to the downward position. Remove the CPU power cable from the routing channel on the chassis. Note, on some models, the CPU power cable may be routed through the clips on the fan diverter. Disconnect the power supply command cable from the motherboard. Press the release tab and disconnect the main power cable from the motherboard. Remove the SATA power and data cable from the routing channel on the chassis. Remove the main power cable from the routing channel on the chassis. Remove the 3 Torx T15 screws that secure the power supply to the back of the chassis. Press the release tab and slide the power supply out of the chassis. Remove the power supply. Replacement. Lower the power supply into the chassis and slide it into place. Replace the 3 Torx T15 screws that secure the power supply to the back of the chassis. Route the main power, the SATA power cable, and the data cable into the routing channel on the chassis. Connect the main power and power supply command cables to the motherboard. Route the CPU power cable into the routing channel on the chassis. Note, if the CPU power cable was routed through the clips on the fan diverter, ensure the CPU cable is routed over the top of the heatsink fan and under the fan diverter. Rotate the fan diverter rear in an upward position. Connect the CPU power cable to the motherboard. Rotate the fan diverter rear to the downward position. Rotate the drives cage to the downward position. How to replace the fan diverter rear. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Note, the fan diverter rear is only available with HP Z2 SFF G4 workstation PCs that feature a 65-watt AC adapter as shown here. Removal. Rotate the fan diverter rear in an upward position. Lift the fan diverter rear out of the holes in the chassis. Remove the fan diverter rear. Replacement. Align the tabs on the fan diverter rear with the 2 holes on the chassis. Insert the 2 clips on the fan diverter rear into the holes on the chassis. Rotate the fan diverter rear downwards onto the heatsink and fan assembly. How to replace the flex port with USB-C. Before you begin, remove the access panel and the fan diverter rear or rear system fan if installed. Note, the flex port accommodates a range of options, including DisplayPort or DP, HDMI, USB-C 3.1 Gen 2 with DP and Alt mode, VGA, and LAN. The flex port shown here is populated with the USB-C 3.1 Gen 2 with DP and Alt mode board. Removal. Remove the 3 P0 Phillips head screws that secure the flex port with USB-C board to the motherboard. Using a flat-bladed tool, carefully separate the flex port with USB-C board from its connector on the motherboard. Remove the flex port with USB-C board. Replacement. Align the holes on the flex port with USB-C board with the 2 alignment pins on the motherboard. Firmly press the flex port with USB-C board into its position on the motherboard. Replace the 3 P0 Phillips head screws to secure the flex port with USB-C board to the motherboard. How to replace the fan diverter. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Note, on some configurations, the CPU power cable may be routed through the clips on the fan diverter. Be sure to remove the CPU power cable from the clips on either side of the fan diverter before removing the fan diverter. Removal. Grasp the fan diverter by the edges and lift it up and off of the heatsink and fan assembly. Replacement. Slide the fan diverter down onto the heatsink and fan assembly. How to replace the rear system fan. Before you begin, remove the access panel. Note, the rear system fan is only available on workstations configured with 80-watt or 95-watt AC adapters. Removal. Using minimal force, disconnect the rear system fan cable from the motherboard. Gently push down on the plastic tab to release the rear system fan from the chassis. Remove the rear system fan. Replacement. Align the 2 tabs on the rear system fan with the 2 openings on the chassis. Carefully insert the tabs on the rear system fan into the openings on the chassis until the plastic tab clicks into position. Connect the rear system fan cable to the motherboard. How to replace the heatsink and fan assembly. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the fan diverter, and the fan diverter rear or rear system fan, if installed. Removal. Disconnect the heatsink and fan assembly cable from the motherboard. Loosen the 4 captive Torx T15 screws in a diagonal pattern to release the heatsink and fan assembly from the system board. Note, due to the adhesive quality of the thermal grease located between the heatsink and processor components, it may be necessary to move the heatsink from side to side to detach it from the motherboard. Remove the heatsink and fan assembly. Note, if you are reusing the heatsink and fan assembly, remove the thermal grease with an alcohol swab. Replacement. Note, replace the thermal grease before replacing the heatsink and fan assembly. The thermal grease should be replaced every time the heatsink and fan assembly is removed. Align the Torx T15 screws on the heatsink and fan assembly with the screw holes on the motherboard. Place the heatsink and fan assembly into position and tighten the 4 Torx T15 screws to secure the heatsink and fan assembly to the motherboard. Reconnect the heatsink and fan assembly cable to the motherboard. How to replace the CPU. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the fan diverter rear or rear system fan, if installed, and the heatsink and fan assembly. Removal. Press down to release the CPU load lever from its retention tab and pull it back. Lift the load plate off of the socket. Carefully remove the CPU from the socket. Place the CPU in an anti-static bag. Replacement. To replace the CPU, first identify the pin 1 position on the CPU by noting the yellow mark on the corner of the chip assembly. Identify pin 1 on the socket on the motherboard by the mark on the corner of the socket stencil. Align the yellow mark on the corner of the CPU chip assembly with the mark on the corner of the socket stencil on the motherboard. Carefully place the CPU into the socket on the motherboard. Swing the load plate down onto the socket. Lock the load lever under its retention tab to secure the CPU. How to replace the motherboard. Before you begin, remove the access panel, the front bezel, the expansion cards if installed, the memory, the M.2 solid-state drive if installed, the wireless LAN module, the fan diverter rear or rear system fan if installed, the flex port with USB-C if installed, the heatsink and fan assembly, and the CPU. Removal. Disconnect all cables from the motherboard, making careful note of their location for reinstallation. Remove the 7 Torx T15 screws that secure the motherboard to the chassis. Lift the motherboard out of the chassis and remove. Replacement. Lower the motherboard onto the chassis and align it with the metal tabs on the chassis. Position the motherboard against the rear I/O panel and align the screw holes. Replace the 7 Torx T15 screws to secure the motherboard to the chassis. Reconnect all cables to the motherboard.